Thank you so much, Hugh, for the introduction. I was delighted when the opportunity came for me to introduce my great friend, Professor Bill Rothman. I've known him for exactly 13 years. I've known of his work well before then. But I came to UM 13 years ago, and then something quite extraordinary happens. A meeting, one of those faculty meetings, that suddenly had a purpose. And there he was, Bill, not only Bill, but also Hugh Thomas. We had a task, which was to create a description and a design for the Humanities Center. And for me, it's very fitting that today the three of us are here together celebrating the latest of Bill's books, right? And also as part of the wonderful series that the Humanities Center puts together. So, what early on, when I first encountered Bill's work, caught my attention was something that I found that was actually quite unique in the way that he approached film criticism. And that's something also very clear in the book that we're going to hear about in a few moments. The unique way in which he puts together philosophy and film criticism. Right? That has been a continuous thread throughout of his careers, and in many of his books you find this element articulate each time in a slightly different way. Right? So in his Hitchcock book, the first, The Murderous Gaze, you already find there the way in which he extracts the philosophical issues out of the frame of the film. So it's a really interesting, very close reading of the film, and the philosophy is right there for the taking. Right? In other works, later on, he'd do the reverse, right? Where you find general philosophical issues, and then, for example, larger Emersonian themes, then he weave beautifully together in the very texture of the films, right? And you find that in his beautiful book, Must We Kill the Thing We Love, right? And here, again, he reinvents himself and does something different, where now we have side by side the philosophy and the film. And if I can adapt, a famous, comment that Kant once made, I want to say that what is unique to the way that Bill does film criticism and this interconnection of philosophy and film is, it becomes very clear that film criticism without philosophy is blind. Philosophy without film criticism is empty. And you find this very narrow, tidy, argued connection, beautifully explored throughout the corpus, and in particular in this book, right? Where even the parts of the book are very clearly demarcated, right? But as typical of Bill, he's very much against sharp boundaries, right? So you don't have a sharp boundary. This is where, neither we have sharp barkings, right? So you have a continuation of where the philosophy goes and where the film begins, right? Those things are threads that need to be examined, put apart, put back together, and he does that again and again, right? In ways that are subtle, suggestive, and extraordinarily illuminating. So I think for both, for your thinking about the films themselves, but also for your reflection about the meaning of philosophy and its purpose and its significance and why it matters. Of course, he, in part, as part of his training in Harvard with Cavell, he had a sense of how those things get together, right? But even Cavell was a kind of a philosopher, right? So more interested in the large scope of the ideas, often not with the patience to look at the tiny little details of the film, right? And that combination, I think, is what we find in Bill Rothman's work, right? And I'm delighted to be able to say these words for him. I'm delighted that that he wrote this book. And now let's hear from him himself. Thank you, Bill.
That was a great introduction. Also, I really like the picture of me that I put on the Okay, so I'm just going to read parts of 3 different essays in the book, which do exemplify, the essays are very diverse, and they're not all like what I'm going to read, but they do I hope that they are consistent with, I think they are, with Ottavio's description, account of me. He's way too smart to get something like that wrong. So, okay. I'm not sure I know how to do this. This is from an essay called What Becomes of the Camera in the World on Film. In Sherman's March, Ross McElwee's documentary account of his life and other anxieties, Ross, the filmmaker, is conversing with Philip, the mechanic fixing his dilapidated sports car. As he often does, Ross is filming without looking through the viewfinder, holding the camera slightly to the side so he can talk to Philip face to face. They hail from the same part of North Carolina and have known each other for many years. They're chatting amiably about Philip's son, whom Ross remembers as a little boy, but who has grown up and has helped his father repair Ross's car. You have only one son, right? Ross says. Philip answers with a nod and a rueful smile. Let's see if it's there. Is it there? One son and one daughter now. He adds. Looking away from the camera before returning his gaze to the filmmaker. That's such a shame about your daughter, Ross says, his voice solicitous. Yeah, that's something. That's just one of those things that happen, Ross says. Again, Philip meets Ross's gaze, which means he looks almost at the camera. Anguish in his eyes. He seems not so much to be looking at Ross as looking to him. Looking to Ross to look at him. Trusting Ross to bear witness to his pain. Sensing that by broaching the subject, he had touched a raw wound, Ross begins zooming in, the better to capture the display of emotion he expects to be forthcoming. I think about that girl, Philip says, adding with another rueful smile, yeah, and I miss her too, before he looks away again, his smile lingering. That smile drops when Ross asks, with palpable sympathy in his voice, how did she die, Philip? Again, Philip, meeting Ross's gaze, looks almost at the camera. The anguish his eyes reveal to Ross, an expression of the pain Ross provoked, touching the still fresh wound, the camera reveals to us as well. Its impact enhanced by the greater intimacy of the framing. She had cancer, Philip answers, trying to sound matter-of-fact. Cancer? Philip nods. Bad death. That's right. Philip's eyes shift almost imperceptibly, as if with exquisite tact, he's freeing himself from Ross's gaze without making it obvious that he desires to withdraw from intimacy with him. Perhaps Philip wishes to spare Ross the burden of having to respond to his pain. Perhaps he wishes to spare himself the burden of having to respond to Ross. He doesn't shift his eyes away from Ross to look at something else. Rather, he stares into the middle distance to be alone with his private thoughts, as if by avoiding seeing, he can avoid being seen, like a waiter who's mastered the art of keeping customers from catching his eye. In turning inward, Philip inadvertently looks in the camera's direction, but without seeming to notice its presence. Can we doubt that he's thinking of his daughter, missing her, seeing her in his mind's eye? After a moment, Philip snaps out of his trance-like absorption. At the same instant, the camera's presence dawns on him, as if what he was envisioning in his mind's eye has morphed into what he now finds himself literally seeing. Awakening to the reality that he's looking at a camera, looking at him, looking at it, Philip quickly turns his eyes back to Ross, whose gaze he evidently finds less painful to bear than the camera's. Until this moment, Philip has behaved as if no camera were present. I'm not saying that he would have behaved the same way were Ross not filming their encounter. I'm simply observing that his behavior betrays no sign that the presence of the camera was affecting him at all. He behaved as if he were simply being himself. The camera was in plain view, but it receded to the background of his consciousness, as it were, when he behaved as if he didn't know it was present. We can say that Philip's behavior denied the camera's presence, as long as we keep in mind that, one, the denial of the camera's presence wasn't necessarily something he was conscious of doing, and two, denying the camera's presence is a particular way of acknowledging its reality. Denying the presence of someone, giving a person the cold shoulder, for example, is a particular way of acknowledging that person's reality. But the camera in Philip's presence is what made it possible for him to be present now to viewers like us, who were not in his presence. The camera is a presence that's also an absence. The reality of its presence is the reality of its absence, the absence of its reality. When Philip acknowledged the camera's reality by behaving in a way that denied its presence, he behaved as if he were simply being himself, not acting, but he was acting. The moment he became an actor, he became a character. The character he plays when he's playing himself, when he's acting as if he isn't acting. When he awakens to the reality that he's looking at a camera, looking at him, looking at it, this onset of knowledge and self-knowledge leaves him no choice but to acknowledge the camera in a way other than by acting as if he's not acting. When he averts his gaze from the camera and looks back at Ross, that's his gesture, not the gesture of a character he's playing. The split provoked by the camera between actor and character is overcome. And then that essay goes on to make things more complicated. And this is from an essay called Silence and Stasis. If Ingrid Bergman and Cary Grant were to play Alicia and Devlin on stage and behaved exactly as they do in the racetrack sequence of Hitchcock's Notorious, the moods their postures and gestures express so lucidly would be missed by the audience. Indeed, Hitchcock cunningly designs the sequence so it makes us aware from the beginning that Alicia and Devlin know that the jealous Sebastian, the leader of a Nazi gang on whom she's been enlisted to spy because they'd once had an affair, may be watching them through his field glasses. There he is. It's clear to us that they're taking care to behave in such a way that anyone watching them, like a theater audience would, from a distant and fixed position, would fail to perceive the signs of their intimacy that the camera reveals to us. Such an audience would have no clue that Alicia and Devlin are locked in a perverse pattern they are unable or unwilling to break, that they love each other but are avoiding acknowledging their love. In addition, the sequence incorporates a number of framings and shot changes that serve both to enhance the expressiveness of the characters' gestures and to articulate the dramatic progression of the sequence and the sequence within the film as a whole. For example, as Alicia is dutifully reporting to Devlin the impressions she gleaned from her dinner with Sebastian and his fellow Nazis, Hitchcock frames them in the midst of the crowd, then quickly cuts to a closer two-shot that underscores their awareness that they're in a public space and have to appear to be just two acquaintances who happen to have run into each other. But when Alicia says, "You can add Sebastian's name to my list of playmates," and that's as close as a film could possibly come under the production code to making, we know what that means. The camera registers and expresses the jump in the intensity of their conversation by cutting to a pair of shots that are more intimate, but that also isolate them in separate frames. First, a shot of Devlin, in which he says, "Pretty fast work." Then a counter shot of Alicia, who says, "That's what you wanted, isn't it?" Her provocative words reveal to him, for the first time, her understanding of his behavior in an earlier scene. Her revelation of how she really thinks, although offered in a mode of attack, is a significant development within a repetitive pattern that had seemed to allow no further developments. This revelation will be fateful within Notorious as a whole, but its full significance will reveal itself to us only retroactively. It initiates a succession of revelations by both of them, a succession that's completed only at the end of the film, when Devlin declares to Alicia not only that he loves her, but that he had loved her from the beginning. As if to underscore both that this moment is meaningful and that its meaning is unknown and unknowable as yet to us. Hitchcock composes this shot of Alicia in such a way that we experience it as spatially disorienting. Now, as she begins to speak, she turns her head screen left. But because she performs this gesture before we had a chance to grasp how this new camera angle relates spatially to the ones that preceded it, we literally can't tell whether Alicia is turning toward Devlin or away from him. The following close-up of Devlin compounds our disorientation. Has he turned away from Alicia as she perhaps has turned away from him? Are we perhaps viewing him from her point of view? Or is it only the camera that has changed position? If Alicia and Devlin were characters in a stage play, these ambiguities would be impossible. On stage, an actress does or does not turn away from an actor. The actor does or does not turn his profile to the actress. And if the actor should turn his profile to the audience, it is he who performs the gesture. The audience position remains fixed. It's not merely that such ambiguities need the camera to capture them. Without the camera, they cannot be. Classical movies regularly employ a panoplia, great, I love that word, of expressive gestures, including but not limited to turning away from the camera, almost facing the camera, looking through the camera, meeting the camera's gaze, that in this way can only have reality. It's not merely that they can only be captured within the world of a film. If a writer like me is to capture a film's moods of faces and emotions and settings, which is a primary way movies express themselves, such gestures have to be evoked, for they color our experience of entire films. Prose doesn't express itself the way film does, by the moods of faces and motions and settings, but by words, or we might say, by the voice or voices we hear or speak in our heads when we read these words. There's always a gap between words on a page and the film itself. When discussing a sequence in a classroom, there's no need to find words capable of evoking a moment's mood. At any point, one can pause the film and speak about its mood while the mood is still lingering and coloring our experience. In the classroom, for example, I might well pause the film, letting the mood sink in and perhaps move us to take thought, the moment Hitchcock cuts to a breathtaking close-up of Alicia pretending to be looking through her field glasses when she's wounded by Devlins saying, "You almost had me believing in that little miracle of yours. Lucky for both of us, I didn't. It wouldn't have been pretty if I believed in you." We experience a film as a moving picture, not as a succession of still frames. Every shot has a temporal as well as a spatial dimension. When a film is paused, its motions are stilled, its temporal dimension stripped away. The film stops being a film and turns into a still photograph, and our experience of the film turns into a memory, as it was destined to become in any case. At least that memory is fresh, like the memory of a dream the moment we awaken from it. And all it takes to turn the still frame back into a film moment is to hit play. Once a frame enlargement, always a frame enlargement, though, when it's printed on a page. The frame enlargement of Alicia holding the field glasses to her face couldn't evoke the film moment were it not for the fact that this is a moment of stasis visually. The film is already stopped in its tracks. When a film is paused, its voices are also silenced. A frame enlargement on a page doesn't silence the film. The film is already silenced when its motions are stilled. In the classroom, pausing notorious at this moment would silence Devlin's voice, an effect that might well reinforce my sense that Alicia doesn't wish for Devlin to finish his sentence, which she fears may wound her even more deeply. If she could make time stand still, she would. As Devlin completes his thought, I figured she'll never be able to go through with it. She's been made over by love. Alicia lowers her field glasses, and this is supposed to be a little video. It doesn't actually work. We have to imagine it. And as she lowers her field glasses, in a whisper replies, more to herself than to him, "If only once you'd have said that you love me, oh Dev." The mesmerizingly slow lowering of the field glasses, it's so slow you can't even see it, gradually unblocks Alicia's eyes from the camera's view, revealing them to be already downcast, presumably to avoid meeting Devlin's gaze and to keep him from seeing the tears and the fire welling up in them. If I were to pause the film here, It's not there anyway. I would have paused the film there. The frame projected on the screen would not by itself capture the mood of this moment, nor would a frame enlargement on the page. Alicia's mood, or succession of moods, is colored by the motion in the frame and the despair in her voice, not just by the expression on her face. If a stage actress were to hold a pair of field glasses to her face, the expression in her eyes wouldn't in the same way be hidden from the audience, nor would it be revealed when the glasses are lowered. Eyes don't reveal their expression when viewed from a distance. But at this moment of the film, there seems an attunement, if not a complicity, between Bergman behaving as if she were Alicia and the camera that is a presence in the actress's world, but an absence in the character's world. It just seems to happen that when Alicia holds the field glasses to her face to hide her eyes from Devlin's, this woman's eyes, that is Bergman's eyes, are hidden from us as well. As it just seems to happen that as the glasses lower, her eyes are unveiled to us as well as to Devlin. That these things do happen, however, colors our experience of the shot, the sequence, and indeed the entire film. The focus of this close-up up to this point has been on Alicia's reaction to Devlin's words, which wound her as he means them to. But there's something they pointedly leave unsaid. She's been made over by love, for all its bitter sarcasm, belies his assertion that he had never believed in her. His implication is that he had never loved her. But then how could she have been made over by love? What Devlin is saying without saying it, what his silence is saying, is that he now knows that she's unworthy of love, but that he had once loved her, and maybe still does. The motion of the field glasses continues the whole time he's speaking the hateful words that nonetheless reveal that he once had loved her. Within this close framing, Alicia whispers, "If only once you'd have said you love me." I hear that less as an accusation than as an expression of the wish that the past could be changed. Alicia has heard, I believe, in Devlin's hurtful words, an acknowledgement, he'd never admitted this before, that he once had loved her. If only he had admitted this earlier, she is saying, without saying it, she would have acted differently, and they would have been happy all this time. I hear her words as acknowledging something she had never admitted before, even to herself, that her actions were as much to blame as his for leading them to the present desperate impasse. She is also mindful, as never before, that the past cannot be altered. The happy times they could have enjoyed together are forever lost. At this moment, she's suspended at the border between fantasy and reality, imagining she's speaking to a man who might still declare that he loves her, even as she thinks she knows that the man in her presence is not the man of her dreams. And yet, in the end, the real Devlin will turn out to become, or always to have been, her dream man. I discern in Bergman's face both sadness and excitement, moods I attribute to Alicia on the basis of what I can see and believe anyone could see in Bergman's expression. Why is she sad? Because she can't turn back the clock. Why excited? Because she's looking forward to, as much as she's dreading, what is about to happen. But sadness at the happiness that is irretrievably lost, and excitement compounded of anticipation and dread, cannot simply be perceived in this woman's face. How could they be? They have to do with the way, for Alicia at this moment, the present is haunted by what might have been but never was, and by what might come to be, both of which have no tangible reality and thus are out of reach, aren't they, of the camera. In attributing to Alicia sadness at the time that's been lost, and excitement compounded of assertion and dread of what might come in the future, I'm offering an interpretation, not a description, of what I believe can be perceived in this woman's face. Virtually all the claims I've been making the last few minutes attribute particular thoughts, particular feelings, particular intentions to Alicia and to Devlin, and particular motivations to Hitchcock for filming them the ways he did. On what do I base such assertions? They can be based only on my experience of the film. But to experience Alicia's sadness as sadness at happiness foregone, and her excitement as anticipation and dread of what is to come, I have to be in a particular mood. I have to be in the mood this film moment casts over me, given the moods cast by all the moments that have led up to it. Only when sounds fall silent do we become aware of the reality of silence. And only when motions have run their course do we become aware of the reality of stillness. As if when motion ceases, time itself is suspended. The way time is suspended for Scotty at the end of Vertigo, for whom no change is possible, no release, no dawning of a new day, no future. Or rather, past, present, and future have become one to Scotty. The future has become for him as immutable, as closed as the past. Alicia at this moment is not at the same place as Scotty. She too finds herself suspended, but she's not beyond suspense the way he is. She hasn't lost all hope. She believes now that Devlin once loved her. Her reaction to his words confirms that she hasn't stopped loving him. I take Alicia to be feeling at this moment that all her hopes are staked on what Devlin goes on to say and do. Blind to the future as we are in our lives, she finds herself at the edge of a precipice, not knowing whether the next moment will save her or plunge her into an abyss, an eternity of falling. Hitchcock liked to distinguish between surprise, when the time bomb goes off that neither we nor the characters know is there, and suspense, when we know but the characters do not know that there is a bomb set to go off soon. Alicia knows, as we do, that Devlin might be about to detonate a bomb, figuratively speaking. She's as powerless as we are to keep this from happening. For Alicia, as for us, this is suspense Hitchcock style. And the last excerpt I'm going to read is from an essay called Space and Speech in the Films of Yasujiro Ozu. David Desser's commentary for the Criterion DVD of Tokyo Story emphasizes the film's Japaneseness. Sprinkled through his commentary, though, are observations mostly helpful about Ozu's cinematic style. Less helpful are his comments about Ozu's violations of classical editing codes, in particular his practice of breaking the so-called 180-degree rule, which dictates that in cutting from shot to shot within a sequence, the camera must stay on one side of an imaginary line, thereby preserving screen direction. Typical is Desser's observation about the passage in Tokyo Story in which the father sits at his dying wife's bedside. It's observation that Ozu resorts to his usual cinematic tricks, playing with space, despite the gravity of the situation, as if Ozu's violations of the 180-degree rule here have nothing to do with the seriousness of what is happening within the film's narrative. But why would a director who believed what Ozu believes about life and about cinema choose to keep breaking the 180-degree rule? In the critical literature on Ozu's films, no one has given a convincing answer to this question until now. For Ozu, there was no reason to follow the 180-degree rule. He thought its logic was implausible. If there's a good reason to break it, Ozu's reason, I think, was that it enabled him to do something that did make a difference to him, that was of value in itself, namely transgressing the injunction, which itself is a pillar of classical continuity editing, against having characters address the camera directly. I argue in what follows that it was Ozu's commitment to filming people when they're conversing with each other by shooting them straight on, not obliquely, that was his primary motivation for systematically breaking the 180-degree rule. Like Hitchcock, Ozu employed shot-reverse shot sequences, often of great complexity, in filming conversations. But Ozu developed an idiosyncratic variant, shooting each character from the literal position of the other character, not necessarily from the other's point of view, since his characters don't always look at each other when they speak. A clear illustration is the passage Desser cites as exemplifying Ozu's practice, penchant for playing with space at moments of emotional gravity. Let's see if we have it. Yeah, in the establishing shot, Kyoko, the youngest child, is in the left foreground, turned away from the camera. The father is in the right background, facing the camera. Ozu cuts to Kyoko, breaking the 180-degree rule and reversing screen direction. Only when she turns to address her father is it revealed that this shot is taken from his position. And when Ozu cuts to the reverse shot of the father, who likewise speaks directly to the camera, the shot is taken from Kyoko's position. Having established such a shot-reverse shot pair, Ozu, like Hitchcock, typically repeats it as many as 20 times in the father and daughter's final dialogue in late spring. Here, Ozu doesn't initiate such a repetitive pattern because the emotional heart of the scene is the father's relation to his comatose wife, not to Kyoko. Instead, Ozu cuts directly to a longer, more objective two-shot in which Kyoko rises and leaves for the train station. For the train station. Note that this isn't the original establishing shot. It's the 180-degree reversal of the original shot. It's a collateral benefit of Ozu's practice that when he suspends or terminates a shot-reverse shot alternation, he has the freedom to cut either to the original establishing shot or to its reversal. Here, Ozu's choice frames the father Buddha-like, with his back to the camera, and places Kyoko's exit in the background, avoiding the need for an awkward bit of staging and perhaps for a potentially distracting cut. It's another benefit that when Ozu starts or resumes a shot-reverse shot alternation, he's free to begin it with the shot of either character. In a pivotal passage in late spring, Noriko and her father, at the end of their last trip to Kyoto together before her marriage, retire for the night on adjacent futons. In the establishing, it's so dark you can't really tell, but in this shot, their heads are to the left. She's lying to his right. Ozu initiates the shot-reverse shot alternation by cutting first to Noriko and then to her father, both cuts breaking the 180-degree rule, as usual. She's looking screen left, not at him, as she says, "I'm not, in my ignorance, I'm afraid I was very rude to Mr. Onodera, her father's friend, who married again after his wife died, and Noriko, who in some ways is more traditional than her father, found that unclean." Noriko's father is looking screen right in her direction. He replies, "Why? Does it cut back to Noriko? His wife is such a nice person. They make a wonderful couple." Smiling, she adds, "There's nothing unclean about them." Ozu cuts again to the father, who says, "Don't worry about it." Then to Noriko, "I shouldn't have said it." As the father says off screen, it never bothered him. Ozu interrupts the alternation of this pair of setups by cutting to the 180-degree reversal of the original establishing shot, which I hope is there. No, it's not. Doesn't matter. Then to Noriko frame as before. Okay. Without a trace of her earlier petulance, she confesses that she at first found distasteful his friend's wish. By extension, she doesn't have to say it, her father's own wish to remarry. He had tricked her into believing that he wanted to marry again because he believed it would be in her best interest to, they're happy being together, but he feels it's really she should get married, and she won't do it unless she thinks if he wants to get married again and she is holding it back, then she would agree, which she does. Anyway, her confession meets with silence. Perhaps afraid that she said something she shouldn't have, she hesitantly steals a glance in her father's direction. The following shot shows him snoring gently. I would say, I originally said snoring. Yeah, no, here's snoring softly. I originally said snoring gently, but my wife, who had to live for many years with a husband who does not snore gently, I come to realize there's no such thing as snoring gently. Anyways, he may be pretending to be asleep. Evidently, if he heard her words, they didn't bother him, or perhaps pretending to be asleep is his way of keeping his daughter or himself from going on to say something better left unsaid. Both because it represents a glance at him she furtively steals, and because it shows him to be sleeping. This shot of the father doesn't feel like half of a shot-reverse shot alternation. Rather, it feels like a shot from Noriko's point of view. I don't know if you could hear that. I hear it in my hearing aids. No doubt a scam artist was calling. It feels like a shot from Noriko's point of view. And the following shot of her feels like a reaction shot. Yet both shots also extend the previous shot-reverse shot alternation. Her father is sleeping, but we still view Noriko from his position. Frustrated in her wish to say what is on her mind, but also relieved that his falling asleep kept her from saying something she perhaps shouldn't say. Noriko looks away from her father. Tilting her head, she gazes heavenward, so to speak, a beatific smile on her lips. Still smiling, she lowers her eyes a bit. As the shot ends, she's looking into the middle distance. The shot that follows, and here I have to get it. The other direction. There we go. The shot that follows has been much debated in the critical literature. To Paul Schrader, it's a distillation of Noriko's sorrow at the realization that she and her father must part. Donald Ritchie adds that the vase contains our emotion as well as hers. As David Bordwell points out, though, both assume that Noriko sees the vase, and this causes the change in her reaction. As Bordwell also points out, the vase is behind her. We're looking at the shot with the vase, but she is looking up at nothing in particular. Bordwell fails to point out, however, that there's a change in her expression, her reaction, when she realizes that her father has fallen asleep, that precedes the shot with the vase. She hasn't yet accepted their separation, since in a later conversation she'll ask why their relationship can't stay as it is. But her smile reveals that she's gotten over her anger and her jealousy at her father's decision to remarry, or so he's made her think. Viewing the shot with the vase, we too come to a realization. But what knowledge or self-knowledge is revealed and hidden by this shot? Let's start with a simpler question. What is it a shot of? Of the vase, surely, but it's no less a shot of the play of shadows. And here, there's, I wanted to show a video that shows this shot, in time in the film. It moves because its image isn't so clear. But there are these beautiful bamboos that are silhouetted by that screen, and they're blowing in the wind. Blowing in the wind on the translucent shoji screen, which is like a stand-in for the movie screen on which the film's world is projected. Indeed, the shot with the vase perfectly invokes the double temporal existence of the world on film. Its evanescent, ever-changing moods of faces and motions and settings, as well as what is fixed in the physiognomy of the projected world. What in the worldview Stanley Cavell calls the reality of the unsayable, the unmoving ground that makes film capable of exhibiting a world at all. Does this composite of object and shadow, of presence and absence, of being and nothingness, represent the passive object of her thoughts? Or does it represent what she is responding to, or what is leading her to? The intuition that is dawning in her. When Ozu cuts back to Noriko, her smile is replaced by a grave expression. Neither anxious nor radiant, she's resigned and resolute. When Ozu now repeats the shot with the vase and holds it for what seems an eternity, and that's where we would see these. It's both stasis and ever-changing movement contained in the same frame. It doesn't register a new realization on Noriko's part, less embracing than surrendering to reality. She acknowledges the sense of necessity that Ozu's camera registers by this shot and by the two shots of the Rwanda rock garden that follow. Let's see if we have them. Wrong one. There we go. Oh, those places in Kyoto are so gorgeous. Kyoto is like LA. It's basically an ugly new modern city, but it has these pockets of just exquisite beauty, which LA does not. And this is the other one. A third shot discloses Noriko's father and his friend, facing but not gazing at the rocks. As Kiju Yoshida tantalizingly puts it, the rocks are gazing at them and at us. Robin Wood claims that late spring is unambiguously a tragedy. And surely it's not. Noriko has a fair shot at a happy life. And she would be no less grateful to her father if she knew of his lie, his deception. For she would also know the truth behind it, that her happiness is the most important thing in the world to him. The unutterably sad truth that Noriko acknowledges in this passage is that the life her father is giving her no choice but to leave behind is precious and irreplaceable. Not that a new life might not be precious too, but a new precious life won't replace the old precious life that she's leaving behind. The intuition that the shot with the vase crystallizes for us, the truth we come to know, whether for the first time or the 1,000th, is that there's no love without loss. Hitchcock's camera represents him personally, but in Ozu's shot-reverse shot sequence effaces his ego so that we may view all the camera's subjects as expressing themselves at once to us and to us alone, and to themselves. Yet each character is not alone, is making a passionate appeal to another person who is making a passionate appeal of his or her own. Ozu's ways of filming conversations, shooting each from the other's position, as if each in turn is speaking directly to the camera, puts us in the best possible position to assess the claims and their moral claims that they make on each other. Ozu's dialogues exemplify an ideal case in which a meeting of minds coincides with what we call soul searching. The screen as window and the screen as mirror merge. The questions Ozu's characters address, like the questions addressed by the couples in the Hollywood romantic comedies that Cavell has studied, are, as he put it, quote, less questions concerning what they ought to do, what it would be best or right for them to do, than how to live their lives, what kind of persons they aspire to be. Cavell could have had Late Spring or Tokyo Story in mind when he wrote, we can see in the laboratory of film the democratization of perfectionism, can recognize what we are capable of in the undramatic, repetitive, daily confrontations to which they call attention. Then we see that in our slights of one another, in an unexpressed or disguised meanness of thought, in a hardness of glance, a willful misconstrual, a shading of loyalty, a dismissal of intention, a casual indiscriminateness of praise or blame, we run the risk of suffering or dealing little death every day. It's the little deaths people inflict on each other. Noriko and Kyoko agree at the end of Tokyo Story that make life disappointing. Their conversation inspires them, and Ozu surely hoped will inspire his viewers to dedicate or rededicate themselves to refrain from inflicting little deaths on others or on themselves. Okay. If there weren't little technical glitches,
we have a little time for questions.
I wouldn't feel at home. Yeah, okay. I can't see. Is a hand? Yeah.
So I really liked your commentary on the still in Ozu film. Of course, throughout his films, you find those stills, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
some people claim that the stills are actually disconnected from the narrative. Of course, you gave a beautiful example why that's not.
Yeah.
Right? Do you think that in general, the stills always are woven into the narrative, or this is a specific case in which they are?
Occasionally, they're very sometimes they're very specific. There's in Late Spring. There's this incredible scene where she and her father go to the No Theater, and Ozu's, the pace of his film, which is slow anyway, it slows down to match the incredibly slow pace and rhythm of the No performance. Where it can go on for hours, and it's not nothing happens, but almost nothing happens. But in the middle of it, she looks at her father, who's got this smile on his face, and he nods to somebody sitting the other side, and she looks in that direction and realizes this very well turned out, handsome, elegant woman, and she'd been led to think that he's thinking of remarrying. So so she feels that's the woman, and she's faultless. There's nothing wrong with her. If her father is going to marry a woman, can't do better than that. And then she looks at him, and then she looks back at the other woman, and she's just Setsuko Hara is just an incredible screen actress. She not a muscle in her face is moved without its enhancing the emotional and psychological impact. So she feels awful. She's filled with anger. She's filled with resentment. She's filled with jealousy. She looks down. She looks up. She tortures herself by looking up again at her, and then she looks down again. And I take it's both anger at her father and profound disappointment in herself. She doesn't want to be the kind of person who would harbor that kind of anger and resentment. And then there's a transition between that scene and the next scene where the two of them are walking away from the camera on the street after the performance is over. It's the one and only camera movement in the whole film. But the transition is affected by this absolutely gorgeous shot of this beautiful tree. You can see it's rooted in the earth. It reaches up to the sky, and that is a shot. The function of which is specific to that moment, dramatic moment within the narrative. What he'll typically do is there'll be one scene playing in, I don't know, one room or home or whatever, and then the next scene will take place somewhere else. And so he'll make the transition, and often he'll hold the end of the scene ends. Sometimes the characters leave the frame. He'll hold on that empty frame, for a moment, and then before he starts the next scene, he'll cut to one of those shots. But they're never totally still. they're not like still photographs. There's it could be like clothes hanging on a line outside, blowing in the wind, or it could be a shot of the harbor, and it's almost devoid of motion, but there's like a boat or two boats that are moving across the water in the harbor. So I think they all function to some degree the way that shot of the vase functions. They all are, I don't know, representations. I don't know if you'd say they're symbolic representations, but they represent in a metaphorical or allegorical way. I think Ozu's, and it's a Buddhist inflected vision of, he doesn't believe that, what goes on in the lives of individual characters is all illusion. It doesn't amount to anything. He thinks that our lives are real and there's nothing more important to us than that. But at the same time, our lives are lived, in a universe, a cosmos, where we're in the great scheme of things insignificant. So he puts these two together, and it's those two, the idea that it's like film is the perfect medium for conveying that, because film is all about motion, but there's also, Cavell calls what's fixed in the physiognomy of the world. The camera moves all over the world. The projector stays in one place. The image shows, moves all over the world, but it's all projected on a screen that doesn't move. So I think Ozu finds deep spiritual meaning in the conditions, the unique conditions of the medium and the art of film. I mean, I think that's why that's what makes him such a great transcendent director. It's a vision of human existence, perfectly cut to the measure of the medium of film.
I think we have time for one more question, then we can continue a discussion on a one-to-one basis.
Yeah, okay.
I kept on thinking of Chris when you were talking about film, and you look at a painting, you get a feeling, you get an interpretation, and then you have a docent come and explain the painting, and they say it's something entirely different. Do you not think that film is open to the same type of thing, that one man's interpretation may be different than the artist, and it may be different than the guy standing next to him, and neither one is right or wrong?
No, interpretations aren't true or false. It's perfectly possible to say things about a film that are just wrong. And you don't have to be Donald Trump to do it. But
what makes something wrong? That's a big word.
You can, at a certain shot, Noriko has a smile on her face. If you say, in that shot, she's looking great, has a grave look, or she's looking... No, you can just absolutely get things wrong. And because historically, most writing about movies have been by reviewers, on the basis of seeing the film once, plus whatever promotional material they have. There's an awful lot of writing about film, even academic writing, that just gets things wrong. And part of what I'm saying is that I make very clear, especially in talking about toward the end of what I was saying about Notorious, that some of what I say is description. You can check it, it's right or wrong. But some of the assertions I was making are interpretations. I say, interpretations, they can only be based on my experience. Criticism has, within literary studies and within film study, there was a period like in the 1970s and 1980s, and we're not totally over it, where there was the wish to, in one fell swoop, make the study of film legitimate. So how do you make it legitimate? You adopt some theory that will serve you as a higher authority than your own experience. So you think then criticism becomes like a science, not like an art. And one of the, it used to be said, it used to be accepted as a dogma that if you want to think serious within academic film study, if you want to think seriously about film or a film, the first and most important thing you have to do is you have to break your attachment to it. But if you break your attachment to it, if you stop loving it, that doesn't get you, if the film is worthy of love, that doesn't give you an objective view of it, then you lose sight of what it is that makes the film worth experience and thinking about at all. So no, interpretation, arguably, if there's one interpretation of something, it's always possible for there to be another interpretation. And it's perfectly possible for interpretations that contradict each other to be equally valid, because interpretations aren't true or false. But, with criticism, at least as I do it, it's, I can't make you agree with my interpretation of a particular, I say I see the expression in Ingrid Bergman's face, I interpret it a certain way. Part of that is verifiable, but the interpretation isn't verifiable. But if I believe in it, if that's how I experience it, I feel that I know, not that it's the only way to look at it, but since I look at it that way and I stand by my belief about it, that proves to me that it is a possible way of understanding it. And any other critic who denies even the possibility of seeing it the way I do, I feel I can repudiate that critic. So the function of criticism, aesthetic judgments, they're not like, it's not mathematics, it's not science, and it's not the same as moral judgments or ethical judgments, which you can say, well, murder is not okay by me, but, if you think murder is okay, that's fine, that's what makes the horses run. With moral judgments, you can't do that. But with aesthetic judgments, and this is Kant, you want others to agree with your judgment, but you have to respect their freedom to make judgments of their own. So, to me, good criticism is not like that's the last word on anything. But good criticism invites a reader who doesn't agree with an interpretation, not just to disown it, but to try to arrive at an interpretation that reader can believe in. And so, criticism ideally is at the service of conversation. In my case, I'm always right, but apart from that.
Well, on that note.